Hi, I'm Dr. Brad Shapiro with Ultimate Health Chiropractic. Thank you for joining us on the learning curve. Today with me I have a very special guest. I've got my beautiful wife, Melissa. How you doing?
Doing good. It's good to be back in this seat again after a couple of weeks. You know, Dr. Anderson's usually the one who sits here, but be filling in for him this week, and he should be back again next week.
Sure. Yeah, we're excited. We've got a lot of great things to talk about. One of the things that we've touched on before, but we wanted to dive back into, was just the idea of diet and nutrition, what role that plays in health. And always a good place to start out with this is just the idea of the standard American diet. It's sad. It's standard American diet. It's a very sad diet. It's a very unhealthy diet. It's full of fast food, convenience food, those types of things. And we just wanted to touch on that because I know this is something you've really looked at a ton. You know, you read a lot of books, and just anything you can share along those lines.
Well, it's actually a topic can be incredibly intimidating and incredibly confusing because it seems like you're getting different information every couple of years, months, even weeks. Here's the new fad diet of the moment. If you don't eat carbs, that's the healthiest way. If you do eat carbs, it's okay as long as you don't eat, such and such other. Or the fact now that we have so many food products on the shelf that are supplemented with, whole grains, making it healthy, or a full serving of vitamin C and these sugary kids drinks and things like that. So it's incredibly overwhelming and incredibly confusing. But the modern American diet is obviously not healthy because look at the health of the country. Mm-hmm. If what we were eating was good for us, we would not have the incredible rates of chronic heart disease, obesity, diabetes, things like that. And modern agriculture has changed more in the past 50 years than it had in the previous couple thousand. Mm-hmm. Our food system has been taken over by industrial agriculture, which is looking to make a big profit with the cheapest possible output of expense as far as how they grow their food. And you can see, just really since I think the 60s, 70s is when things really started to change. We started to get into the whole idea of low fat was the way that you needed to go. But you've probably heard the saying before, the low fat craze has made us fat. If it worked, we would be way healthier than we are right now. So obviously there's something going on. There's some sort of a disconnect there.
Sure, and that makes me think of a couple things. Number one, this idea of just a one size fits all model. I see that all the time with my patients. They're thinking, Doc, I thought I was supposed to eat low carb. I thought that's what you're supposed to do, but yet I don't feel great. Or, Doc, I thought you were supposed to eat low fat, but yet I don't feel real good. Why do I have health issues? What's going on? A couple key things I want to touch on. Number one, everybody is different. That's one of the real issues, and that's one of the keys behind me looking at the blood chemistry. I do the functional blood chemistry, as I talked about before. It's very different in the sense that the ranges are different. They're much tighter. They're much closer to what you would consider real health. And then also, I'm looking for the nutritional deficiencies, the vitamin deficiencies, the mineral deficiencies, the areas of the body that need to be supported, and then customizing a specific plan around an individual's specific needs. And so that's one thing I want to just address right out of the gates is there is no one size fits all. It's really about understanding the individual and what they need. Something else, I think is key to talk about, and this is something that you've looked into quite a bit, was just the types of things that are part of our diet today that were not, like you said in the 60s, the high fructose corn syrups, the sugars, the soy. Can you kind of expand on some of those types of things?
Absolutely. You can look at the statistics going back, 50 years and look at how much families typically spent on their food and how much they spent on their health care. Mm-hmm. And look at the correlation between that period of time and what it is today. Well, back then, it was something like Americans spent about 20% of their income on their food and only about 9% on their health care. Mm-hmm. Now it's completely flip-flopped. We've been They like to say the term, we've been fortunate enough to have access to cheap food in this country. However, now we're spending a lot less in our food, but we're spending a tremendous amount more on our health care.
Sure.
It's a much greater proportion of our income that's being spent on health care these days than back before this whole change in the way that we process food in this country took place. And that's the key right there, is really when you start talking about the processed food, that's what's going to get you into trouble.
Sure. Yes.
Real food versus processed food. Real food is things that you would find in nature: fruits, vegetables, certain whole grains, pastured meat and eggs, not the industrial raised type meat products. And it's become so ingrained in our culture these days that I think people are starting to feel like they can't eat without eating those particular products. Everything has become a convenience food. Everything has become prepackaged. And it's so tempting. Who wouldn't want to not have to cook every day when you can just, pull something out of the cupboard, pop it in the oven for a few minutes, and bam, there you have dinner. However, when you start digging into this a little bit more, not only are you looking at the ingredients that are in these foods that may not necessarily be good for you, but just what it can do for your health, and you look at how these products were made, going all the way back to the fact that you pick up any processed item in the grocery store and it's probably going to have corn or soy in it. Well, backstory a little bit. Corn and soy are two of the products that are called commodity crops. They're subsidized by the government, and as a result, they are grown very, very cheaply. So they are put into everything because it's cheap to make products that way. The one part of this where the cheapness is not very beneficial is the farmers. The farmers are not making a lot of money on all of what they are growing because of the fact that these are commodity crops. They are grown in vast fields of one crop. They're sprayed heavily with pesticides and herbicides to kill weeds. And that's the corn and soy that you see in the high fructose corn syrup, the soybean oil, the partially hydrogenated oil that's in so many of our packaged foods. And that's what we're eating. And your body just does not know how to handle that.
That's a great point. And one of the things that makes me think about as well is just the idea of, people are typically looking for some hard and fast rules, some things they can really depend on, some just clear boundaries on what to eat and what not to eat. And the great thing about what Melissa's talking about is just this idea of just eat real food. That's a pretty hard and fast rule. Don't eat fake food. Don't eat food that's been processed, that's been loaded with high fructose corn syrup, sugar, soy. Just don't eat those types of things. I know when I was talking to Melissa maybe 6 months ago, we were actually both reading a book, and one of the lines in the book was don't eat anything that your grandmother wouldn't recognize as real food.
Right.
Keep it with real food. And one thing I want to touch on again is just the blood chemistry. The fact that the soy has been so depleted, and we talk about some of the alterations. The soy has been so depleted that I think everybody needs supplementation. As clean as you and me and Jackson, as clean as we all eat, we still all supplement.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that ties back to the agricultural practices. Our soil is becoming depleted, so therefore the plants that are being grown in the soil don't produce as much of the beneficial nutrients as they used to. And you can kind of notice there's been a little bit of a revolution that's starting to happen the past few years where people are saying, you know what, enough. They're starting to get back to the basics. Farmers markets are taking off like wildfire across the country. And we're going to talk about that more coming up a little bit later in the show, because we have some fantastic farmers markets in our area. But people are really starting to realize, I think, that our way of growing food cheaply is not working. It's not helping us in our health, and it's not benefiting the farmers whatsoever. So we'll talk about that more too, and more about the real food aspect. I actually have a good story about how that can help you with weight loss as well.
That sounds great. Once again, I'm Dr. Brad Shapiro with The Learning Curve. Please hang in there. Next, we're going to talk about some of the things that Melissa mentioned. We're going to talk about where can you get this food, what kind of impact will it have on your health, whether it be weight loss or diabetes or heart disease, those types of things. So just stay tuned and we'll be right back. Hi, I'm Dr. Brad Shapiro with Ultimate Health Chiropractic. Thanks for joining us on this second segment where we're going to continue with some of the things we've been talking about in terms of food and the impact that can have on your health. With me once again, I've got my beautiful wife, Melissa Shapiro, and let's get back to some of the things we were just talking about. Let's get back. Where can people find the food that we're talking about? Let's start with that.
Well, you can find it in the grocery store. A lot of grocery stores are responding to the consumer demand of the past few years for fresh, organic, healthy food, and you're starting to see it more and more in your local grocery store. You can also find it at farmers markets, and if you're motivated enough, you can grow some food yourself. It's not that difficult. We'll talk more about that in detail again here in a little bit, but in case you're just tuning in, we were talking about the standard American diet of the past couple of decades, which consists of a lot of processed food, a lot of fast food, convenience type food, because we've gotten into such a busy lifestyle these days that cooking gets put on the back burner. We go for the fast, we go for the easy, but the fast easy is the food that's most unhealthy for us. And one of the rules we often talk about is if you just eat real food, you'll notice a tremendous change in your overall health. They've actually done studies where in some of the more primitive cultures around the world, one that I can remember specifically, they took Aborigines in Australia who had become introduced into modern culture and had developed and adopted that Western lifestyle of the high sugar, lots of added fat, and high salt. Well, these people had developed incredible rates of the diabetes and the obesity and the heart disease, the things that we deal with here in the United States. So the experiment they did was they took them and put them back into the bush, as they call it there, into their native culture, which consisted of hunting and gathering. They didn't have access to the sugar, things like that, and their rates of obesity and diabetes plummeted. And all they had to do was take out that processed food. I kind of have a little bit of a personal story, of how effective this can be. We have a son, Jackson, who's 2.5 years old, and after he was born, I really had a lot of trouble losing that last 10 pounds of post-baby weight. Most of it dropped off. I had gained about 32 pounds, but I was still stuck with that last 10 that would not go away. I was exercising. I thought I was eating pretty good, things like that, and it just wouldn't budge. So I decided, this is just as I was starting to get into learning about the whole real food movement and getting away from the processed prepackaged foods. So I decided to cut it all out. Ate lots of fruits and vegetables, just anything that came out of a package. I really tried not to eat it, and I upped my water intake, and within a month and a half, 8 of those pounds were gone.
Sure.
There's still about 3 left, but most of it completely went away, and that's the only thing I did. I just quit eating processed food.
Yeah,
it was unbelievable.
Simple stuff, and just so viewers will kind of have a background as well, you were getting adjusted on a regular basis. The adjustments are going to have a big impact on the nervous system. For you guys that don't know, I am a chiropractor. The way the chiropractic philosophy works is the idea is signals start up here at the brain, travel down the spinal cord, and then come out of all these nerves. They go into every muscle, organ, gland, everything in the body. So if the nerve flow to the digestive tract or to the adrenal glands, thyroid, those types of things isn't functioning properly, then you're going to have problems losing weight. So we were doing the adjustments. Melissa had changed the way she was eating. She was changing the amount of water she was taking in. All these types of things. And, I just wanted to emphasize that because it's so key to understand how individual needs can be so much different. One person might need adjustments. Another person might need nutritional changes. Another person might need stress management techniques. But it all weaves together. And because of this huge soup of clinical nutrition, of diet changes, of the adjustments, you were able to lose a lot of pounds, and it was cool to see.
And I was not exercising at that point. That's something to mention. I'm not a fan of it. It's very difficult for me to get into that routine, much to his disappointment, because he loves to exercise, but it's just very hard for me to get into that. And I had stopped because I felt like it wasn't working. I was running on the treadmill at the gym and taking walks around, where we live, and nothing was working. So I quit, And, you know, the food really made a huge difference for me.
And how many of our viewers can relate to that? How many
sure
people can relate to the idea of, man, I think I'm doing the right thing. I'm trying to exercise. I'm trying to eat right. I'm trying to make good choices, and they're not getting the results. And, you know, how long is somebody going to hang in there if they're not getting results?
Probably not long.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one thing that got me into these models is how can I shave off time? As I like to tell people all the time, sometimes I have to settle for base hits, just depending on the complexity of the case, but I'm always swinging for the fences. And a lot of it's because the quicker people get results, the more apt they are to stick with it and to feel better.
Yeah, and an interesting point I've heard you mention before that I think might be worth talking about with you know, weight loss and eating the food that can possibly be toxic to our bodies is mention about the fat cells, how that works with toxins in your body, because I think it's fascinating.
Well, toxins store in the fat cells. When we mention toxins, we mention things like mercury, we mention things like pesticides, we mention things like all kinds of heavy metals. You know, the thing to understand with toxins is the air's not as clean as it used to be, the water's not as clean as it used to be, the food's not as clean as it used to be, all these types of things. And so it's easy for the body to get toxic. Those toxins store in the fat cells, therefore, if you're storing the toxins in the fat cells, you can't lose the weight. And so we see a lot of dramatic changes in people in terms of weight loss by just pulling those toxins out of the body. Therefore, their body can process the fat cells more efficiently and they lose some weight. So it makes a big difference.
Yeah, and one of the things that you kind of have to take on the responsibility of, if you want to change the way that you're eating and shift into this healthier way of doing it, is cooking. You know, there's lots of benefits to cooking at home. Number one, you're going to save a lot of money because it's way cheaper to buy all your ingredients and cook at home than it is to go out to eat, you know, several times a week. Even though you may feel like you're saving time, think about how long it takes you to drive to the restaurant, sit down, decide what you want, order your food, eat it, pay your tab, and then leave. And that same amount of time you could have cooked at home and had a much, much healthier meal. Restaurants notoriously put a tremendous amount of salt and fat in their food. That's why it tastes so good. They know what they're doing, right? I mean, and that's not to say that you can't ever eat out. Of course you can, but reserve it for, you know, a special occasion, not a 5 and 6 time a week event. And cooking at home does not have to be complicated. I think it's very intimidating for people, especially people who may not have had a lot of experience with cooking. But I tell you what, the simpler you keep it, the healthier it's going to be. Sure. You don't have to make extravagant meals, you know, home-cooked lasagna where you roll out your own noodles and things like that. It doesn't have to be like that. If you can just get, you know, a healthy meat, maybe some lean chicken or some lean beef, a couple of vegetables on the side, and it's going to be way better than anything that you probably would have been able to get packaged at the grocery store or out at a restaurant.
Sure. And it's neat to see, you know, the transition you've taken with the cooking, because initially, you know, Melissa was concerned about eating without wheat. She was concerned about eating without dairy and some of these other things, because it is a learning curve. As you make these dietary changes, as you figure out what foods need to be eliminated from the diet, it can be a learning curve with the learning how to cook and prepare food and all that type of stuff. But I think you've realized as time has gone on, it's not that big of a deal. And it can really taste great too.
It can. I've always loved to cook. I'm not one of those people who absolutely hates to be in the kitchen. It is something that I do enjoy. However, I had my way of cooking, and I'll never forget the day that Brad came to me and said, I think it would be good for our health if we went gluten-free, just cut it out of our diet. And I promise you, I looked at him straight in the eye and I said, okay, you can cook for yourself for the rest of your life, because I'm not doing it. I didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to upheave the entire way of cooking that I had learned. And I thought it was going to be complicated and just too big of an undertaking, and the food wouldn't taste good. But that's not true. It's been fine. We eat great. We eat healthy. We eat good tasting food, and it is doable. Oh,
you would have thought she thought I was suggesting we become serial killers. I mean, she was just not happy about the idea of cooking without wheat. But with that, we're going to go ahead and close out this segment. Again, I'm Dr. Brad Shapiro with Ultimate Health Chiropractic. Hang in there for our next segment. We're going to get into more of kids and how these dietary changes can change the health of a kid. I've worked with a lot of kids, everything from ADHD to autism, and I've really seen the impact of this kind of stuff. So hang in there with us, and we will talk about that here real soon. Hi, I'm Dr. Brad Shapiro with Ultimate Health Chiropractic, and thank you for joining us again here on the Learning Curve. Once again, I've got my beautiful wife, Melissa Shapiro, with me. Thanks for hanging in here with us.
It's good to be here again this week. Dr. Anderson will be back next week, but while he's away, kind of filling in his place, and it's been fun. We're having a lot of good conversation about some fun topics.
Sure. And as we were talking about during the break, we're going to talk about kids a little bit in this segment. Mm-hmm. And for you guys that don't know, we have a 2.5-year-old son, Jackson, and also we've seen this type of model and the impact it can have on a lot of other kids, whether it be my patients or we've got some other friends that take care of their kids in a similar fashion. And we just really know that the dietary changes can have a tremendous impact on the health of a child. When they're first developing, their immune systems are developing. It's key for these nutritional aspects to be there. And what are some of the things that you've seen with Jackson? You know, I know we've talked about just how his health compares to other kids, compared to, ear infections, those types of things. What are those types of things that you've seen?
Well, it's really disturbing these days because you honestly feel like these kids that we have, they're fighting an uphill battle and they've been dealt an unfair hand. We hear the statistic nowadays that this generation that's coming up is going to be the first generation that will have a shorter lifespan than their parents, which means they will likely die at an earlier age than their parents did. And you would think with the advances in medicine and all those kind of factors that shouldn't be the case, but the diet is what is doing it. Mm-hmm. But again, like I said, it's almost unfair to them because look at everything that's marketed toward children. Mm-hmm. You've got the sugary breakfast cereals, you have the sodas, the fruit drinks that are loaded with sugar, the cookies, the crackers, the snack foods that are processed. They have the food colorings in them, not to mention all the, soybeans and corn that's not raised very healthily like we talked about earlier, ingredients a mile long where you can't pronounce half of them, and their poor little bodies just don't even know what to do with them. So they're coming into this world fighting this battle that is going to be very hard for them to win. So we were just determined that Jackson was not going to eat a lot of those things. Of course, anytime you have a baby, they need the best nutrition you can possibly give them in those first early years of life because that's when they're developing. He's had mainly organic fruits, vegetables, and meats in his short 2.5 years, once he started obviously eating solid food. Avoiding the dairy for a lot of kids can be key because milk not necessarily is something that's good for every kid, and a lot of parents are surprised to hear that. A lot of times when I mention that Jackson's never been on cow's milk, people are very surprised. Oh, well, what about calcium? Isn't that what he needs? Well, yes, they do need a lot of calcium, but they can get it from places other than a jug of milk in the fridge. They can get it from almond milk is what we give him, which has more calcium in it than a glass of regular milk. Coconut milk is also an option. Of course, there's the vegetables, which have a tremendous amount of calcium, and I know sometimes it's hard to feed a small child vegetables. He's 2, he's picky just like every other toddler. So instead, we try and do little tricks such as making a smoothie, like smoothies, while I'll throw a couple of leaves of spinach in it. And in a blender, it blends up so finely that they can't tell that there's green stuff in their smoothie, and he will drink it right down.
Sure. And that's the key, or one of the keys to understand is this stuff does not have to taste terrible. It's you can feed it to a kid, you can feed it to a 2-year-old, and there are tactful ways to introduce this nutrition in such a way that they're getting what they need, but it tastes good. One of the things I wanted to touch on real quick as far as how this impacts a kid is just I want to give you some insight into the clinical aspect. What happens with a lot of these food allergies that we're talking about is the real deal is the fact that they're synthetic. They're not real food, and so your body acts accordingly. It says, what in the world is this? I need to attack it. I need to charge up my immune system and take care of the enemy. You put something synthetic like high fructose corn syrup, or like soy that's been processed, or these sugars, or all these types of things, or pesticides, whatever. Your body goes into action. Your body realizes that, hey, this is not real. I need to handle it. And it fights off that stuff, but then it also attacks tissues that it does need. It attacks thyroid tissue. It attacks adrenal gland tissue, which all these things tie into the immune system. The immune system is compromised as a result of this, and therefore, you're going to have immune system issues. You're going to get sick more often. So through this huge chain of events, to kind of shorten it, you eat something that's not real, activates your immune system attacks itself, therefore your immune system's compromised, and as a result, the kids are getting more infections. They're having to take gas drops because they can't digest food and they're bloated. They're having to take children's Tylenol. They're having to be pounded with antibiotics, which that's a whole other story in terms of what that does to your immune system. But it's a merry-go-round, it's a vicious cycle, and a lot of it does start with the diet. It starts with the food that we're putting into our bodies and into our kids' bodies. So I just wanted to touch on that. Also wanted to, I don't know if we touched a whole lot on the farmers markets and kind of where to get the food, some of the shopping that we do with Jackson.
Sure. If you want to eat this way, you really have to change the way that you shop. It's very difficult sometimes to find this kind of healthy food in your run-of-the-mill supermarkets. You can find a few things, and it's getting better. That's the key. Grocery stores are finally responding to the fact that consumers are demanding healthier, more organic food. But you can find so much here locally. We are so incredibly blessed in this area, Franklin County, Coffee County, the surrounding areas. We have amazing farmers markets, and if you've never been to one of them, I strongly suggest that you check them out. We actually have two, which are the ones that I typically shop at. And they're online farmers markets. It's the wave of the future. Technology is grabbing hold of our farmers markets and making them so incredible. One easy way you can find them is to go to localharvest.org. It's a great website that can hook you up with local farmers, local vegetable growers, people who raise pastured beef and chicken and eggs. And the great thing about them is you go online for a couple of days a week. I'm going to use the one in Sewanee because it's the one that I typically shop at, sewanee.locallygrown.net. And you go on their website anytime between Saturday at 5 o'clock in the evening and Monday morning at 10 o'clock, and the farmers put on the website everything that they have available that week. And you basically just go through and check, okay, I'd like some of that. Boom, I'd like some of that. Oh, I need some lettuce this week. I'll have that. There's a chicken. I'd like to have one of those next week for dinner. You submit your order, and then they send that to the farmers. So the farmers don't pick more than they need to. If they had to go to a typical, stand and have a big display of food, well, they might not sell everything. This way, they only pick what people want. They deliver it to the Sewanee Community Center, which is the designated pickup area. You go up there on Tuesday evenings, and your entire order is right there. You pay them, and you walk out the door.
And as you mentioned, it's the perfect blend of technology and healthy, and it's convenient for everybody. The farmers, as you mentioned, don't have to shell out more than they can afford to, so they're benefited in the process. And then also, the consumers, they can get what they need.
Yes.
So it's just a neat implementation of these types of concepts, and it's way more convenient. I think a lot of people feel like because I don't live in a big city or this or that, I don't have access to these things, when in fact we're surrounded.
There's benefits to living in a rural area if you want to eat good, fresh food. And another aspect of this that's so important is the farmers are greatly benefited. One statistic I've heard is that if you buy a typical bag of bread at the grocery store, the farmer who grew that wheat makes about 8 cents. Which is about what it costs to make the packaging. Versus you buy a loaf of bread from someone who makes it and sells it at a farmer's market, they keep something like 90 to 95 cents. So you see the benefit to the growers, and not just that, but we're also keeping the money here in our local community. We're saying, no, we're not going to support the industrial agriculture that has the monopoly that has taken over the food system in America. We are going to support the farmers in our backyard, and that money stays right here locally. You're eating better food, it's fresh, the meat is way healthier because the animals were raised on pasture, not in confined feedlots where they eat nothing but grain, which anyone who knows cows are meant to eat grass, not grain. So they're healthier as a result. The eggs are better when they come from chickens who are allowed to roam free. I could go on and on about this. So support your local farmers markets. They're great around here. There
you go. Well, I want to thank you for being on the show with us today. As Melissa mentioned, Dr. Anderson's going to be with us again next week. But once again, I'm Dr. Brad Shapiro with Ultimate Health Chiropractic. Please stay tuned with us next week here on the Learning Curve. We're going to touch on some more exciting topics. We're going to get into my office, some of the components in it, so you can visually see how these things tie together. How you can see how the rehab center and the nutrition and the adjustments and some of the equipment we use, just all these types of things fit together. So join us next week and we will charge on ahead.